most exciting piece that I try to teach and try to impress upon is think about not just what you can do today with the technology, but think about how this is going to change how you deliver and new capabilities that you can actually use this technology for.
Welcome to the Coursera podcast, where we have conversations with renowned experts and industry leaders to explore global trends impacting the future of education and work. I'm your host, Arunav Sinha, Vice President of Global Communications at Coursera. In January, leaders from around the world met at the World Economic Forum, and there was a clear theme. The world is changing faster than ever, reshaping industries and business models as we know it. But how leaders deal with change and disruption, with an added complexity of geopolitics, has become a defining trait of successful leaders. Today, we are sitting down with someone who has not only studied these shifts but has helped organizations develop strategies to deal with them. Suraj Srinivasan is a professor at Harvard Business School and an expert in navigating disruption, corporate governance, and AI. Over the years, he has worked closely with leaders and organizations to tackle big challenges and drive meaningful change. Suraj has written over 60 case studies and has a knack for turning complex problems into practical solutions. Suraj, welcome to the podcast. We are thrilled to have you.
My pleasure entirely, Arnav. Thanks for inviting me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. You've had a fascinating career path, so why don't we start right there? You started investment banking and then you launched a retail chain in India, and then obviously you became a professor as well. So, how these experiences influenced the way you approach governance innovation?
Well, thank you. Thank you for starting there. You're taking me back in time. I was fortunate to start my professional career in the early 1990s in India when the country liberalized, opened up to foreign investments, started growing really rapidly. And at such times of growth, you cannot overstate the importance of good governance and risk management as you drive this fast growth. The lessons for AI, as we are seeing it today, and the opportunity it presents similarly for fast growth are all over the place. The second thing, as anyone probably exposed to India or worked or grown up there can tell you, is the lessons about how you can do more with less. You would have read so much about all the innovation that comes from frugality. And by the way, just last month, you saw DeepSeek doing exactly the same thing and sort of turning the AI industry, putting sort of panic in the AI industry with doing more with less. Finally, the third thing, probably the most important thing, is the role that technology can play in growth and development and improving people's lives, while at the same time being sure that we ensure equitable access to all the things that technology brings and to technology itself. In a place like India, you see the impact of unequal access everywhere. And as we are in this phase today, sort of bringing it to the topic of our conversation on AI and innovation, how do we ensure equitable access as this sort of AI wave keeps moving forward? So thanks for taking me back in time. But I think the lessons from there absolutely keep informing me in what I study and do every day.
And you're absolutely right. Those are top of mind for many leaders across the world. And you've worked with many leaders, you've worked with many companies which are right in the middle of navigating these big changes. What's the one thing you think leaders often overlook during times of disruptions and the qualities that make a leader stand out during these challenging times?
That's a very important question and something that we have to very carefully think about. When you are a leader in a moment like this, big change, big disruptions coming, it's very hard to develop a long view because you are in the trenches dealing with managing this change and you don't know what form the disruption is going to take. So the best thing to do is to develop a directional strategy, even when we don't know what the destination itself is going to be. For instance, we know that most, if not all, businesses will operate differently 5 years from today because of AI. We might not know what exact form that new model might be, but we know it's going to be different from what it is today. So the question is, how do you determine that direction and figure out the pace of learning through experimentation, things like driving pilot programs, and then executing fast as we learn? I was reminded of something Bill Gates said some years ago, that we underestimate what we can do in 10 years and overestimate what we can do in the short term. So think about that underestimating part. How do we get to where we want to be? And what will help us get there. What capabilities do we need? How are we going to learn and actually figure out what pace to execute that?
In fact, this is becoming most evident with what the world is facing now, which is Gen AI. And it is reshaping industries at an incredible pace, and leaders have to reimagine their roles as well. What do you think is the most transformative potential for businesses today as you consult with companies around the world?
One of the most interesting things, especially with Gen AI, as you mentioned, Arnav, is the ability to do things that weren't possible without the technology. In many, many companies, you will notice that the initial priority, and rightly so, is to pick the low hanging fruit, where the ROI is most clear, the organization's capability to execute is most evident. However, the biggest potential is going to come from realizing the kinds of possibilities that weren't feasible before, the products and services that can be created that one couldn't have previously. This can come from massive scale because of lowering the cost of production of whatever it is that you're making, product or service, or from novel capabilities, things that you are able to do today that you couldn't do before. And this is where the change is going to come from, even though the temptation and the rational thing to do today might be to go after the low hanging fruit. But the real big impact will come from things that you couldn't have done previously. Not just doing things a little better and faster, but by doing things that are new and novel.
Gen AI is not just reshaping industries, but it's also reshaping classrooms and education and interaction between student and the instructor. And you are right at the forefront of that. And many institutions around the world are looking towards top institutions like Harvard and professors like you to see how you deploy and use it within your classroom. Can you share some examples of what made a real difference for you and your students?
So I teach a course on Gen AI itself. Not only do I teach courses where we use tools like ChatGPT and Cloud and others in the classroom, but I also teach a course on generative AI and generative AI strategy and what business leaders should know about generative AI. So we go beyond tools like ChatGPT to actually build applications, including agentic applications. One of the goals is to help students gain enough proficiency in the technology to be effective as, say, product managers in developing solutions in startups or in larger companies. At HBS, all students have been given a subscription to ChatGPT. That sort of goes with the terrain itself. Using that capability or that availability of the application with all students, another big use case for me is to help students learn how to make tools like ChatGPT or others your personal productivity agent. For example, in my course, we have a project where students have to create a new product pitch deck. All the research is done using Gen AI tools. User research is done with Gen AI tools the same way by creating user personas. And then you actually create the materials, the deck, the audio, video presentations to go with it. So you're really learning how to use the tool as a thought partner, as a productivity enhancer. So think of this in two parts. One is, how do I actually build using tools? And then how do I use the tools themselves as partners in thinking about issues, as partners in improving my productivity and actually doing things better, faster, in more innovative ways than I could have done without the benefit of these tools.
Fantastic. That's really helpful to instructors around the world so that they're not deterred and somewhat fearful about letting people use, but actually, how do you deploy that in the most useful way? And in fact, your case study on Coursera's adoption of Gen AI is fascinating. I had a front row seat to that journey, and it's been incredible to see how this transformation unfolded. What are some of the key learnings from Coursera's approach to innovation that might be useful to other companies?
Thank you. Arnav, first of all, it was such a pleasure to write that case along with you and your colleagues. By the way, this case study, you would be interested in knowing, has become one of the most widely adopted ones among my colleagues who teach AI and Gen AI as an example of the issues to be tackled when an organization adopts this technology, both the opportunities and the implementation challenges that might come with it. One of the key lessons from the case, and I've been teaching it to scores of executives, students, companies, and so on. One of the key lessons is the range of areas where you can adopt generative AI. Early on, the company did the following. It adopted the tech across a range of use cases from, at one end, the most obvious productivity enhancing areas, for example, creating a software coding buddy. In this case, they did it in a private way, in a private instance. But there are many applications like that. For example, GitHub Copilot. These improve productivity by, say, 30 to 40%. And many companies are doing that today. The important thing is that these are tasks that humans will continue to do, at least for now, but they do it better and faster by 20%, 30%, 40%. So this is at one end of the spectrum. As we go along, the other most interesting example of one of the use cases that they deployed Gen AI for was translations. Coursera, as many people would know, has a few thousand courses that were predominantly in English. It would cost about $10,000 to convert from English to another language. With Gen AI, this cost drops by 2 orders of magnitude. I understand the cost is less than $20 per translation from English to another language now. So what did the company do? They quickly translated all courses to 24 or so languages. But imagine the business model change that this creates. The top of the funnel on the go-to-market strategy just exploded from English speakers to anyone who wants to learn. So now you've gone from operational efficiency, productivity enhancement to essentially expanding the scope of your customers, where you'll find customers to a global business from a predominantly sort of English-speaking learner. The third thing, as we go down the spectrum, is what the company calls a course builder. This is used for customizing courses that an enterprise or a university or college that would use. But what is different is the technology now allows the ability to build a course, puts that ability in the hands of a user. Now you can create potentially mass customization and change the way a user interacts with the platform. So this is not just productivity enhancement. Even translations, in a way, is productivity enhancement, but at a 100x level. Software coding was productivity enhancement at a 30% level. Something like Course Builder is a mass customization possibility. The last and the most exciting one for me is Coach. It's essentially kind of an AI avatar synthetic teacher that can help students learn, but the coach is trained on courses, but not just on courses. It is also trained on how to teach. It changes the nature of interaction of a student on the platform from being a pipeline where faculty across many universities or companies created courses and the learner on the other side kind of received it. Now the platform becomes an integral part of that transmission by actually becoming a part of how somebody learns and how somebody teaches. Now this is a never before capability. Everything else was doing things better and faster. This capability is essentially a personal Aristotle for every Alexander the Great. Aristotle was a personal tutor to Alexander the Great, taught him philosophy that helped Alexander as they went about conquering the world.
Or Chanakya to Ashoka.
Chanakya to Ashoka, you pick your favorite, your historical philosopher and emperor there. But imagine a personal tutor. Now, what this means for people like me whose job is to teach, we'll figure that out. But this is a never before capability, if executed well, would be a game changer in how we learn and teach. So what is exciting, at the one end, do things better and faster. At the other end, novel, new capabilities, never before things that are going to change how we learn and teach. That range of things is something for anyone to learn. So, speed of adoption, range of adoption, from improving efficiency to developing never before capabilities. And in doing so, experimentation, learning, improving, adapting, and so on. But really, to repeat myself, the most exciting piece that I try to teach and try to impress upon is think about not just what you can do today with the technology, but think about how this is going to change how you deliver and new capabilities that you can actually use this technology for.
Wow, that's a fantastic encapsulation of efforts that I've seen, but I could not have done a better job than what you just did. You've worked extensively in corporate governance, and AI ethics is another hot topic right now. It's inevitable that AI will be part of our lives, but we have to also be thoughtful about how and when we embrace the opportunity. So, how can leaders make sure that they are using AI in a way that builds trust and reflects their values?
I'm so glad for this question. There's two sides of that coin. Like, one is the opportunity side of the coin, and the other side is the ethics and the risk that might come with it. My first thought in thinking about this issue is you would think about how AI impacts values, just like you would drive a values-based decision making in any other context, which, by the way, is not easy in any setting. First off, how does the organization understand the value system and how actively is it practiced inside the organization? We often see, value statements on the wall in sort of nice PowerPoint slides, but how actively is it practiced? How does the organization actually understand and embrace the value systems that it has? The next is to know how you create boundary systems to prevent any decisions from going off the rails. And this is not even AI specific. How do you make decisions in an organization in an ethical fashion? How do your people in an organization when to say no, what to say no to? I'm writing a case study on IBM, and they call it ethics by design in their software development process. But think of ethics by design in the entire organization. Driving values is a positive way of thinking about it. Creating boundaries, the ability to say no, is the a way to ensure that the train stays on the rails. By the way, I often give the example of the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, if you look at them, 9 of the 10 Commandments is thou shalt not. So that's a boundary system that God has given. What am I going to say no to lead an ethical and value-driven life? Practically speaking, how do you know your organization will adopt these as it comes to AI? I mean, think about running a workshop on what decisions are potentially prone to ethical conflicts. Do we have an organizational capability to address these ethical issues? How do our current value systems hold up in some decision-making context in the world of AI? For example, if you're a publisher, how are you using AI in your newsroom? There'll be pressure to perform. There's always pressure to perform, and AI might exacerbate that by introducing new ways of working. What are the key decisions where the potential for values to be disrupted becomes higher? How does AI adoption challenge those values? By the way, this also requires that you know where AI is being used across the organization. Even just practically having like an AI inventory, there are existing kinds of risk, bias, data privacy, and so on. In some cases, these get amplified because of AI and Gen AI. Cybersecurity is one issue. Personal information, PII data is another issue. Bias is another issue. And then there are some novel areas, hallucination, intellectual property risk, and so on. So even just having this kind of a map on where is AI being used, what are my traditional risks, how will they get amplified, and where are new things going to come. So this at a tactical level, you need to do that. But at a more fundamental level, how does my organization practice values? How will that get challenged? Same idea, like, traditionally, how do I handle my value-driven decision making? Where will these challenges get amplified because of AI? Developing that sensibility will help a lot.
Wow, that's a very useful model to start putting all of this together on cataloging how we use AI and then look at the strategic and tactical uses and implications, all of that. That's a very useful model.
Absolutely.
Suraj, as we talk, means there is AI summit happening in Paris, where leaders from around the world have descended to discuss the opportunity challenges as well as guardrails. You have written about the eco-digital economy, which focuses on creating environmental and social value alongside economic impact. Do you think leaders are doing enough to ensure AI becomes a net positive for the environment?
There is clearly a lot of thinking that is going into this. A lot's being written, a lot's being worked upon. There are two parts to this. We coined this eco-digital economy framing when we wrote that report last year. It was on what's happening in the world, both on these sort of parallel but converging tracks, eco on one side and digital on the other side. One important thing that well recognized is AI is power hungry. How do you make AI less power hungry? How do you create enough sustainable power to support all the good things that are going to come from AI? So that's one piece of it, the power that goes into AI. The other piece of it is how do you use AI to help mitigate the issues around things like climate change to create a more sustainable climate impact in the world. Both these things have to work in parallel. On the second piece, lots of innovation is going on. Startups, big companies, power generators, fossil fuel producers, and so many different ways of thinking about how AI can help us measure, analyze, minimize, mitigate, find new solutions to build sustainability. We can talk about many different examples, but just the ability to create new products that AI is allowing us to come up with, which can do the same job with less resource intensity. Even think about the kinds of things that we talked before, just productivity enhancement, going to have a big impact on how much energy we need for doing the routine tasks that we do all the time. The harder piece is to think about how AI itself can be less power hungry, or how do you create sustainable sources of energy for powering AI. The large model builders and companies like Microsoft and Google and other sort of the giant tech companies are actively working on that, nuclear power and so on. What we also have to figure out, one very interesting thing that I've been exposed to, I'm working on, is how do you manage, measure, and reduce power consumption at the use case level. The model developers are a few, the big ones, they are going to do what they're going to do. But what can we do as Coursera, as Harvard Business School, as everybody else, as we deploy these technologies at the inference time? So lots of interesting, important technical developments on things like, if I send a prompt, which is the best model for the most cost efficient, energy efficient model that can be used for answering that particular query? Which data centers should that question go to? Or how do I manage the interaction between where I'm deploying models and where they're getting used in terms of sort of reducing energy efficiency of what is being sought after? A lot of smaller companies, a lot of bigger companies trying to work on this. I am an optimist. I think we'll solve both problems. The problem of energy consumption for model development itself, but what we can do in a much more distributed fashion is every chief AI officer, every CEO asking this question about how much are we spending, how much power consumption or how much energy consumption, how much carbon consumption is going into deploying the models in my organizational level, and then trying to develop metrics and tools to actually try to minimize and optimize that. But I'm optimistic that we are on a learning curve. We got to learn a lot. I don't think that, at least I'm not aware of perfect solutions being available right now. They probably aren't, but we are in early stages of this whole innovation cycle.
Absolutely. Suraj, you are an optimist, and we are an optimist at Coursera. Deeply believe in the power of AI and how it can transform the world and make education, learning, and skills and equity and opportunity more accessible to people around the world. That would be a perfect note to conclude the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights on navigating disruption, corporate governance, leveraging AI, conundrums that CEOs face, and fostering innovation has been incredibly valuable. Thank you so much, Suraj.
Thank you, Arnav. It was a pleasure talking about these issues. Clearly, very important ones, things I think a lot about. Thanks for the opportunity for sharing this with you.
To our listeners, if today's conversation inspired you to learn more or to think differently about navigating change, explore resources on Coursera.org. Whether it's building skills in AI, leadership, or strategy, lifelong learning is key to staying ahead. Until next time, I'm Arunav Sinha. Thank you for tuning in.